Right, I want to talk about the different models of state that exist and have existed. We've got the absolute state that existed in Europe before the French Revolution. And that was when one person, the king or the queen, could have all the power and do whatever they wanted. And so the state was them, it belonged to them. We remember from our history lesson, King Luigi the 14th said, the state, I am the state. And he was the state because whatever he wanted would be done. There was no separation of the king's possessions and the state. The state belonged to him. So, that's one type of state that was quite oppressive, we can imagine. Whatever the king wanted was the destiny of the state. But then we had the revolution and we created the free state, the liberal state, we should say. And here there's several characteristics. One major characteristic is the human rights. We've got the rights of man. There was written lots of freedoms that we could have. The freedom to choose our political destiny, our religion, to express our opinion, these types of things. So these were a characteristic, the individual freedom. And then, of course, you have a constitution. There's a written constitution where the state was outlined and described, and all the workings of the state were described, and who has the power. So it was kind of a pact for the population. And that was another aspect, important principle of the liberal state, that there was a constitution which gave the state shape and direction, because the state knew what it could and couldn't do and how it could and couldn't do things. And then you've got the rule of law. The principle of the rule of law is part of the liberal state, where the highest authority is the law. We can say the law is sovereign. No one is higher than the law. So we can see this as a opposite to the absolute state, where the king is the law and is the highest authority. No, in a liberal state, the law is the highest authority, and so you have a rule of law. To make this rule of law possible, you need a separation of power. So there's this principle of separating the power, where each organ can do part of the power, one element of the power, and can check each of the other organs. So we've said before, the legislative power, we can say Parliament. Parliament makes the law. We've got the executive power, is the government, and the government applies the law. This is the parliamentary democracy. And the judicial law, which is very separate, not like the other two, which are a bit controlled. The executives are controlled by the legislative power. The judicial power is very separate because it has to be very impartial and judge that the law is always respected and not go towards any political philosophy at all. So it needs to remain very separate by separate. The judges cannot be chosen or act according to the wishes of the politicians, the legislative and executive powers. So, the judges cannot fear or favour, they are not influenced by fear or favour, we say. And then lastly, you've got the principle of representatives. So the people, after the revolution, not everybody voted, didn't have universal suffrage, but those privileged souls that did vote could vote for a representative which would go to the parliament and then make the law, have the power to make the law and then also form an executive to apply that law. So we've got that idea of representatives doing the will of the people. So we've got democratic idea. Now, after the Depression, after this, we had the liberal state, and the Depression, we can say, was caused because there was too much freedom in the economy. And so we went to the other extreme. You know, the economy collapsed, there was a crisis, the government didn't get involved, it just watched this economy go down, 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 saying, oh, the markets will save themselves, they'll work, they'll function somehow at some point, and they didn't. And so this other philosophy was evolved from the people, the kind of populism of the people in those days. We see, you know, the totalitarian state emerge. We can say that, you know, could be seen in Nazi Germany, where you've got the abolition of freedom. So nobody is free, everyone is controlled, and they control everything. Like, you know, the ideas, the way you think, and the education, and the economy, and everything is under the control of the totalitarian state. No one's allowed to be different. Diversity is suddenly a threat, the enemy. So in this situation, we have uniformity is the objective of the state. No freedoms, uniformity, and to get uniformity, obviously you need suppression of the people, the people's diversity, their natural, human diversity. We know about Jus naturalista, that natural freedom we have to think in different ways must be suppressed. And that was the case. There was a lot of suppression. They have even a very strong security force to make sure that the people thought in the way they should think, which is along ideological lines. Their philosophy must be always adhered to. And then there was concentration of these three powers. There was no separation of legislative, executive and judicial powers. It was all concentrated in a few hands, and the idea that the law is a rule of law, the law is the highest authority, goes out the window. So suddenly the ruling regime is the highest authority. There's no legal principle which everyone must follow. So after the Russian Revolution, we see the emergence of a socialist state. That was another type of state. Socialist state, the characteristics of this was the abolition of the market, which means there's no private property. Everything belongs to the state. And so we remove all that individuality too. So a characteristic is, again, people in the end must be oppressed, suppressed, because they must always think of the interests of the state and they can't think of their interests. And we know that's not human nature, so we have to have, again, a strong security force to reinforce this collective mentality, and that everyone's pulling and pushing for collective interest, and individual interest is never considered. So again, it becomes a totalitarian regime. You have a single political party, because there's no other philosophy. If you make everything public, there's no choice and freedom of different strategies. There's just that political party that wants everything public. So then you have the idea of the democratic state, the modern state, we can say, is a democratic state, and you've got sovereignty that belongs to the people. When they vote, they have the sovereignty, and they've got a lot of power as well, and protections, and you've got the constitution. There's the idea that there is a constitution, so you have a rule of law and political pluralism, so there's lots of different political parties fighting for certain ideas and certain interests. And then you've got a recognition again of human rights in a democratic state, particularly to protect the minority. You're always, in a democratic state, the will of the people must be expressed in the vote, but the majority can't become a tyranny, and so there must be human rights to protect the minority, which they can't, just throw lots of people in prison because they don't like them. There's certain things that democratic states cannot do. There's a limit. We call that human rights. And then you've got the social state. We can add that to it, where you have social rights. Social rights, we can think about education, health, pension, things like this.